Alright, so here's a quick technique on how to give a static object a really dramatic sense of motion. And in this case, I have a motorcycle with a rider on it, and it looks like he's going pretty fast, but he isn't, because you can see those wheels aren't moving. It's just a static pose of the motorbike. Well, we want to use Photoshop to give it some dramatic motion. Now, what are the things that imply motion? Well, certainly movement of the vehicle. You know, there'd be a blur around the wheels. There'd be a really blurred background. So where do we get a background? Well, we could go out and look for a background of a photograph of a blurred street, or even go out and shoot one. That'd be a lot of work. But if it's going to be blurred and you're not going to be able to tell what really the background is anyway, does it really matter? You can almost use anything. In fact, I have this image here. You would never consider using this for a background for such an image, but I'm going to use it. And we're not going to use the whole image. We're actually going to use part of it. And this is part of what I've been trying to impart on a lot of people, is that when you're working creatively in Photoshop, you don't always want to pay attention to an image as a whole. Look at parts of it. You may find yourself having some creative ideas just by using parts of an image. In this case, I'm just going to simply select this area, just a small thin area across the buildings here. Let me move this down so I can get some of that green right in there. So there I have just a thin strip of this image selected. And that's all I need. That's all I want out of this image. I'm going to use my Move tool to simply click and drag this into this document. And then I'm going to, let me go ahead and minimize that. I'm going to drag it beneath the image of the motorcycle, but I need to rotate it now. I'm going to bring up my free transform, zoom out a little bit, hold down my shift key and just rotate this 90 degrees so it is straight up and down, and it'll hit OK. Actually, I want to bring up free transform once again. This time, zoom in a little bit more. This time I'm going to grab the center handles here, and holding down the Option or Alt key, I'm going to scale this out from the center just like this, going out to the outer edge as far as I can. And once I'm out there, just simply press Enter. And here we've got a really blurred background. It's actually kind of got a real sense of motion to it. Normally it wouldn't, but because we have a bike in front of it, it tends to sell that effect a little bit more. Well, I'm going to make it a little bit more dramatic by tilting it a little bit. So I'm going to bring up my free transform. Just kind of scoot this over, and I'm going to tilt this just a tiny bit there. And we also need to tilt the bike along with it. Let's go ahead and tilt that just a little bit. Let's go ahead and scale it in just a tiny bit there. And right about there. That'll be okay. Now, got our bike on our background. Well, we're not quite there yet, because those wheels, they're still not moving. So I'm going to go over here and get my elliptical marquee tool, and making sure we're on the bike layer, I'm going to hold down my Option key, or my Alt key, and the Shift key to constrain my proportions. And then from the center of the wheel right here in the front, I'm just going to drag out until I get most of that tire, the entire wheel, inside my selection. Then I'm going to go under Filter, to Blur, go to Radial Blur, and we'll keep this simple. Let's do it at about 40. And make sure that we're on spin, because we want the wheel to be spinning, not zooming in effect. And then we'll hit OK. And there we get a really harsh spinning effect. The only problem is it has also spun the brake and all the brackets that hold the wheel on the bike. Well, normally those would not be moving, so we would actually see those. So, simply going to bring those back in by using a history, the history brush. So making sure we're on our history palette, I'm going to go activate the state that was just before that radial blur. This is just every step we've taken so far. There's that radial blur we applied. Here's the move selection. Actually, I don't want to rewind. I want to keep it back up here. Making sure that the history brush icon is next to that state. Grabbing that history brush, just going to paint back in that area. And it's referring to this state right here, because that's what I've got selected right there. So just bring back in those parts, and that'll look pretty good. And then we will go and do the exact same thing on this wheel over here, holding down Option Shift, Alt Shift on the PC, dragging out, and then since the blur was the last filter I applied, all I need to do here is simply go under the first item, which is Command F, to reapply the last used filter, radial blur. Deselect, get that history brush, bring back in those parts. There we have it. Now there's one more thing I'm going to do. Back in the Layers palette, I'm going to turn off the bike for a second here. I'm going to load the luminosity as a selection, the highlighted areas of this background as a selection. I'm going to do that by pressing the Option, Command, and then the tilde key, which is a little wavy line key next to the number 1. Now we'll activate the luminosity. Now on that background layer right here, I'm just going to press Command J. It'll bring that highlighted selected area to its own layer. I'm going to turn on that bike once more. I'm going to drag the layer of the motorbike, between these two layers right here. Then I'm simply going to, on that top layer, this selected, you can see it's kind of making our bike blend into the background a little bit. I'm just going to drop the opacity down just a hair. In fact, quite a bit. Just like that. So you can see it starts to really get a sense of motion. If we bring that opacity back up just a little bit, just like that, really starts to get a sense of motion, and it really feels like it belongs in that background. So just a quick tip on how to get a sense of motion on a static object. So give it a try yourself. We'll see you again.